The shivering night. The night was colder than any the little alien girl had ever felt. She sat alone in the ruins of her broken village, her tiny body pressed against a cracked wall. The wind cut through her thin clothes like knives, and her teeth shook in fear and in cold. Her people were gone. They had left her behind because she was small and weak. In their eyes she was a burden, someone not worth saving. She hugged her knees and whispered to herself, trying to believe she still mattered. But the silence of the night answered with nothing, only the sound of the wind. The ground was wet with rain, and drops slid down her face. She tried to wipe them away, but her hands were shaking too much. Her stomach was empty, her heart heavier than her body. She remembered how the others had walked away without even looking back. She had cried for them to wait, but no one listened. Now she sat there, unwanted, forgotten, shivering in the cold dark. Far above the ruins, the clouds moved and revealed the stars. She looked up, her eyes full of tears, and asked the sky why. She had been born like this. Was she cursed? Was she meant to die alone? Her people always said she was too small to work, too weak to fight, too slow to run. She had believed them, but now, with no one around, the words hurt even more. The stars blinked, silent and distant, giving her no answer. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was low at first, like a deep hum in the air. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. The hum grew louder until the night shook with its power. A light cut through the clouds, brighter than fire, brighter than the moon. She covered her face with her arms, thinking the end had come. Maybe the sky itself had come to take her away. The light grew closer, filling the ruins with a strange glow. The girl's heart beat fast, fear and hope mixing in her chest. Then she saw it, a ship descending from the stars. It was not like the ships of her people. It was larger, stronger and strange. Its metal body shined against the dark sky. Steam. Rising as it landed on the broken ground, the girl's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but her body was too weak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the giant machine as its door began to open. Smoke hissed from the side as a ramp lowered slowly. From inside came the sound of boots on metal, heavy and steady. Her small hands grabbed the edge of her cloak, pulling it over her head. She tried to hide, but her glowing eyes peeked through the shadows. A figure stepped out, tall and broad, nothing like her people. It was a stranger, not from her world. The firelight from the ship's engines lit his face, showing his features clear and sharp. He was human, a being she had only heard about in whispers and warnings. Her people always said humans were dangerous. Wild and heartless, they said humans fought with iron fists and cold eyes. The girl trembled, believing this was true. Why else would a human come to a broken village in the middle of the night? She pushed herself tighter against the wall, praying he would not see her. But his eyes scanned the ruins slowly, searching, listening. His steps crunched against the wet ground as he moved forward. The girl's breath was shallow, her chest burning as if her heart would escape. Then his head turned, his eyes landing on the small figure hiding in the shadows. She froze, unable to move. His boots grew louder as he walked toward her. Every step made her want to cry out, but no sound came. He stopped just a few steps away, looking down at her. She expected anger, she expected cruelty, she expected to be struck. But instead, the man slowly took off the heavy cloak from his shoulders. He bent down and wrapped it gently around her shaking body. The warmth of the cloak surprised her. Her wide eyes lifted to meet his, expecting a trick. But his face was calm, his voice quiet as he spoke words she did not know but somehow felt. The girl blinked, the heat of the cloth sinking into her frozen skin. No one had ever done this for her. No one had cared. The man stood close, not with threat, but with a strange protection. The night around them was still cold, but in that moment she felt a spark of warmth, a spark that made her wonder if, maybe, just maybe, she was not truly alone. The girl sat under the heavy cloak, her small hands clutching the edges like it was her only shield. She looked up at the tall figure who had wrapped it around her, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen, his face rough, his eyes sharp but not cruel. The human's breath came out in white clouds in the cold night, yet he knelt near her, calm and steady. The firelight, From his ship painted his armor with a golden glow, making him look like some warrior from a story. But his eyes did not shine with anger. They were soft, watching her shiver beneath the cloth. The girl whispered, her voice so weak it almost broke. Why give me this, stranger? The man tilted his head, his words strange, his language different. But she felt the meaning more than she understood. His voice was low and gentle, like he was speaking to someone who had been hurt for too long. Her people had always shouted at her, always cursed her, always called her useless. This man spoke like the opposite of all that pain. He reached into a small pack tied to his belt, pulling out something wrapped in paper. He opened it slowly and held it out toward her. The smell of food hit her nose, warm and rich. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She had not eaten for days. She hesitated, her hands trembling, afraid it was a trick. But the man simply waited, his arms steady, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, she reached out, her thin fingers brushing against the food. When she bit into it, her eyes filled with tears. It was soft, warm, and real, not like the scraps her people had thrown at her before. The human watched her eat, his face unreadable but not unkind. She wanted to ask him more, but her words stuck in her throat. Instead, he looked around the ruins, his eyes sharp like a hunter. It was as if he expected danger to come at any moment. He gathered wood from the broken houses and, with skillful hands, lit a small fire near the wall. The flames flickered, casting shadows across the broken stones. The girl stared at the fire, warmth brushing her face. Her heart beat slower, calmer, but her mind was still racing. Why would a stranger from the stars care for someone like her? Her people had said no one wanted her, that she was a curse. If even her own kind had left her, why would a human show kindness? She turned her head toward him, her voice weak but brave enough to ask, why not leave me too? The man looked at her, his face lit by the fire. His answer came slow, heavy, like he wanted her to believe it. No one should freeze alone. The words struck her deeper than the cold ever had. She lowered her gaze, her hands clutching the cloak tighter. Tears slid down her face, but they were different from before. Not only tears of pain, but of something new, something she could not name. Hope, maybe, a tiny spark inside her chest. She had never been worth saving before, but here was someone who thought differently. The human shifted, sitting near the fire, his back against the broken wall. He took out a strange tool from his belt, a small device that glowed. He pressed it, and the fire burned stronger, brighter, warming the night around them. The girl gasped softly, eyes wide in wonder. Her people never had such things, never such power in their hands. He noticed her stare, and turned the tool in his palm, showing it to her without fear. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "No, keep yours." He smiled faintly, not forcing her, only returning the device to his belt. For a long time, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft hum of his ship nearby. The girl sat close to the flames, wrapped in the cloak, and for the first time in many nights she did not shake from cold, but inside her heart trembled with questions. Who was this man? Why had he come here, and what did he want from her? She studied him carefully. His scars, his strong hands, his tired eyes. He looked like someone who had fought many battles, someone who had seen death. Yet here he was, protecting her, a child no one had wanted. Her eyes grew heavy, her body weak from hunger and cold. The warmth of the fire and the cloak lulled her closer to sleep. She fought it, afraid he might vanish if she closed her eyes. But the man leaned forward, his voice low again. "Rest," he said, his tone carrying something solid, like a promise. Her lips trembled, but she obeyed, laying her head against the wall. As her eyes drifted closed, the last thing she saw was his figure near the fire, sitting guard, silent and strong, like a wall between her and the dark. The night carried on, cold winds rushing past the ruins, but inside the circle of firelight the girl was no longer only abandoned. She was no longer only shivering and unwanted. A stranger from the stars had wrapped her in warmth, had given her food, had spoken words of protection, and as she slipped into sleep, she clutched the cloak tightly. For the first time in her life, she believed she might see another dawn, and when she did, she would not be alone. The morning came slow, its light creeping over the broken stones of the village. The little alien girl opened her eyes to the warmth of a fire that still burned, its smoke curling into the air. For a moment she thought it was a dream, that the fire, the food, and the human were all tricks of her tired mind. But when she turned her head, she saw him sitting there back against the wall, eyes half closed but alert. He had not left her, not in the night, not in the cold, not when she was too weak to watch him. Her chest filled with something strange, something she had never felt before. Safety. The human stirred as she moved, his eyes sharp again in a heartbeat, scanning the ruins before settling on her. He spoke softly, his words still strange to her ears but his meaning clear. "Morning," he said, his voice low but calm. The girl lowered her gaze, unused to such greetings. No one in her tribe had ever spoken gently to her. They always barked orders or threw insults. Now this stranger from the stars greeted her like she mattered. The fire popped as wood cracked, and the smell of roasted food rose into the air. The man had cooked something while she slept. He handed her a small piece wrapped in cloth to keep it warm. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but her heart hesitated. Why would he feed her again? What did he gain from this? She looked into his eyes, searching for the cruelty her people always spoke about, but she saw only patience waiting for her choice. Finally, her trembling fingers reached out, and she ate. Every bite filled her with warmth. Every swallow chased away the emptiness inside her. When she was done, the human added more wood to the fire, his movements calm, skilled. The flames grew stronger, pushing back the cold wind that still tried to creep through the ruins. The girl stared at the fire, her eyes wide. Her people had always treated fire as a tool, harsh and dangerous. But this fire felt different. It felt alive, like a guardian between them in the dark. The girl whispered, her voice soft. "This is the first fire that feels like home." The words slipped out before she could stop them, her cheeks burning in shame. She expected him to laugh at her, like her people always did. But the human did not laugh. He only gave the fire a thoughtful look. Then he nodded as if her words were not foolish but true. The girl pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders, her small body still weak. She glanced at him again, curiosity fighting fear. "Why? Help me," she asked, her voice breaking with the question. He looked at her, his eyes dark and steady. His answer came slow, almost like it hurt him to say it. "No one deserves to be left behind." The word struck her like a blade, sharp, but healing. Tears pricked her eyes again because deep inside she still heard the voices of her tribe. Useless, burden, worthless. But here was a man who said the opposite, who looked at her not as a curse, but as someone worth saving. The fire between them flickered, its light painting the ruins in gold and shadow. The girl began to speak, halting and unsure. She told him in broken words how her people had left her when the hunters came, how they said she slowed them down, how they did not even turn back when she cried. Her voice cracked as she spoke, and for a moment she thought he would look away. But he did not. He listened, his jaw tight, his eyes burning like the fire itself. When she finished, silence hung heavy. She waited for him to speak, for him to tell her she was weak too. Instead, he only said, "They were wrong." The girl's heart stumbled. No one had ever told her that before. Not once. She turned her face toward the flames, hiding the tears rolling down her cheeks. The human stood, brushing ash from his hands. He walked a few steps to gather more wood, every move of his body steady, strong, certain. The girl watched him, her fear still there but softer now. She wondered what kind of man would fight the cold and light fires for someone he did not know. What kind of man would give food and warmth without asking for anything? Maybe, she thought, humans were not monsters like her people had said. Maybe this one was different. The day moved slowly, the fire keeping the cold away. The girl found herself sitting closer to the flames, and closer to him. Every time the wind howled, she flinched, but every time she looked at him, her heart steadied. He was like the fire itself, dangerous in power but strangely comforting. When the shadows grew longer and night threatened again, he rebuilt the fire. The girl whispered, softly, "Will you stay tonight, too?" Her words were almost lost in the crackle of the flames, but he heard. He gave a single nod, his eyes steady, his voice firm. Yes. The cloak around her shoulders, the food in her stomach, the fire warming her skin. These things were more than she had ever been given. But the human's promise, simple and true, was greater than all of them. For the first time in her life, she did not fear the night. The fire burned between them, not only of wood and flame, but of something stronger, something that made her believe that maybe she was not unwanted, maybe she was not worthless, maybe she was meant to be saved. The second night fell heavy on the ruins. The fire burned bright between the human and the little alien girl, its glow pushing away the shadows. For the first time in her short life, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear. The human sat beside the flames, sharpening a strange blade with calm, steady hands. Every sound of stone against steel echoed across the broken walls, a warning to anyone who dared to come close. But far in the distance, another sound was rising. The girl stirred in her sleep, her small ears twitching as if they knew before her mind did. She opened her eyes, her body stiff. The human noticed her change and looked toward the dark horizon, his eyes narrowing. The sound grew clearer. Laughter, heavy boots on stone, the cruel voices of those who had once abandoned her. Her heart sank. She knew those voices. The tribe had returned. They had left her behind to die, but now they came back, not to save her, but for another reason. The human stood, his blade flashing in the firelight. He moved with calm but firm steps, placing himself in front of the girl. She pulled the cloak tighter around her trembling body, her breath fast and shallow. The hunters arrived, their shapes appearing from the shadows, tall, broad, and armed with jagged weapons, their eyes glowing in the fire's reflection. At first they looked at the human with surprise. Then their lips twisted into cruel smiles. One of them laughed, his voice sharp and cruel. "So, this is where the worthless one hides." Another spat on the ground, his eyes filled with hate. "Even a stranger cannot change what she is. Cursed and useless." The girl shrank back, her heart pounding. Their words cut deep, the same words she had heard all her life. But the human did not move aside. He stood like a wall, his blade steady, his eyes hard as iron. The hunters stepped closer, their cruel laughter filling the ruins. One pointed at the girl, sneering, "Give her to us, off-worlder. She does not belong to you." The human's voice came out low and sharp. "She belongs to no one." The hunters paused, their smiles fading. They were not used to being challenged, especially not by an outsider. The leader stepped forward, towering over the fire, his weapon gleaming. "She is nothing, and nothing is what she will always be. Step aside, human, or we cut you down too." The girl trembled, her eyes wide. She expected the human to back away, to leave her like everyone else had. But instead he stepped closer, his blade raised, his stance unshaken. His voice carried through the ruins like thunder. "Then try," the hunters growled, their laughter gone. The night filled with tension, the fire between them flickering as if it felt the storm to come. The girl pressed her back against the wall, watching, her chest tight with fear. Never before had anyone stood for her, never before had anyone spoken against the tribe. She whispered softly to herself, Why does he fight for me?" The hunters circled, their eyes burning with hate. The human shifted, every muscle ready, his blade glowing faintly under the firelight. The leader raised his weapon, shouting, "She was born unwanted. Let her die, unwanted." The words echoed in the girl's ears, stabbing into her heart, her vision blurred with tears, but then she saw the human move. He struck first, his blade a flash of silver against the dark. The hunters staggered, shocked by his speed and strength. He moved like fire itself, burning everything that came too close. The clash of metal filled the ruins. sparks flying, shouts ringing. The girl covered her ears, but her eyes refused to close. She watched the human fight, every strike full of will, every movement sharp and sure. He was one against many, yet he stood like an army. The hunters cursed, stumbling back. The firelight showed their anger and their fear. This human was not like them. He fought not for power or pride, but for something stronger. He fought to protect. The girl's tears fell harder, her small body shaking. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever risked their life so she could live. The leader roared, charging forward, his weapon swinging down like a storm. The human met the strike, steel against steel. The impact shook the air, sparks flying into the night. For a moment, the girl thought he would fall, but the human held his ground, his eyes blazing, his strength unbroken. With a sharp twist, he forced the leader back, his blade cutting through the air with deadly promise. The hunters regrouped, snarling. They were angry, but they were also afraid. The girl could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the hesitation. The human stood tall, his breath steady, his voice carrying across the ruins. "She is not unwanted," the girl gasped, her chest burning. Those words shattered the curse that had haunted her all her life. The hunters growled again, but their steps slowed, their courage faltering. The human took another step forward, his blade steady, his presence unshaken. The fire behind him burned, brighter, as if the night itself had chosen his side. The girl's heart pounded with new strength. For the first time, she did not see herself as weak or worthless. For the first time, she believed she might be more. The hunters hesitated, their sneers fading. The leader snarled one last threat, but his eyes betrayed his doubt. And in that moment, the girl knew this fight was not only for her life, but for her worth. The human was proving what her people had always denied, that she was someone worth saving. The ruins shook with the clash of steel. The hunters roared with anger, circling the human like wolves around prey. But he did not step back. He stood, firm, his blade steady, his eyes sharp. Every time one lunged forward, his sword cut through the air with deadly precision. The firelight flashed against his armor, making him look less like a man and more like a force of nature. The little alien girl pressed her back to the wall, her hands gripping the cloak around her. Her heart pounded as she watched the impossible, one human against a pack of hunters. Yet he held them back. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever raised a blade to protect her life. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look away. The leader of the hunters shouted, his voice echoing across the broken stones. "He is only one man, crush him." They rushed together, their weapons swinging with fury, but the human moved. With speed and skill, he ducked under a strike, his blade cutting across an enemy's arm. He spun, kicking another back into the wall. Every move was sharp, controlled, filled with purpose. The girl covered her mouth, her body trembling. She had always believed she was nothing, that she was cursed. But now someone risked his life for her, and with every strike of his blade, that belief shattered piece by piece. The hunters grew angrier, their roars shaking the night. One slashed forward, his jagged weapon grazing the human's shoulder. Blood darkened his armor, but he did not stop. He pushed forward, striking with greater force, his will burning brighter than pain. The girl gasped, her voice breaking. "Stop, you're hurt." But the human only glanced at her, his eyes fierce. "As long as I stand, they won't touch you." The words struck her deeper than the cold ever had. Her body shook not from fear, but from something new. Hope, strength, courage, all rushing into her small chest. She wanted to move, to fight, to help. But her legs felt heavy, her body too weak. Still, her voice rose, trembling but strong. "You're not alone." The human fought harder, as if her words gave him power. He struck down another hunter, the man falling back with a scream. Others hesitated, their courage breaking under his relentless will. The fire roared higher, sparks flying into the night. It was as if the flames themselves recognized the battle, not just a fight for survival, but for something greater. The leader growled, his face twisted in rage. "You defend what has no worth," he spat, pointing at the girl. "She is nothing, she will always be nothing." The girl froze, the words stabbing at her heart. For so long she had believed them, for so long she had let those words chain. But then her eyes met the human's, his face steady, his voice strong. "You're wrong," he said, his blade raised. "She is worth more than all of you." The girl's breath caught, her tears falling freely. Her chest burned with a fire that was not from the flames. For the first time she believed those words. For the first time she felt she could be something more. The leader roared, charging forward with a furious strike. The human met him head-on, the clash of their blades ringing like thunder. The force shook the ground, sparks flying in all directions. The girl's heart nearly stopped as she watched. The human staggered, blood dripping from his side, but he did not fall. He pushed forward, his will unbroken. The hunters hesitated, their courage breaking. One stepped back, then another. They looked at each other, doubt spreading like cracks in stone. The leader shouted for them to fight, but his voice no longer carried the same strength. The human stood tall, his blade steady, his voice carrying across the ruins. "Run, or face me until none of you remain." The silence that followed was heavy. The hunters looked at the man, then at the girl behind him. They had always called her nothing. But now they saw someone willing to bleed for her, and in their eyes she was no longer worthless. One by one they backed away, their weapons lowering. Their growls faded as they turned, retreating into the night. Only the leader lingered, his eyes filled with fury. But even he stepped back at last, defeated not only by the man's blade, but by his unshaken will. The ruins grew quiet, only the fire crackling, and the man's heavy breaths filling the air. The girl ran to him, her small hands reaching for his side where blood stained his clothes. "You're hurt," she cried, her voice breaking. But he only gave a faint smile, shaking his head. "I've been hurt before. But this was worth it." Her tears fell harder, not of fear but of something else. No one had ever said she was worth fighting for. No one had ever called her more than nothing. Now this stranger from the stars had stood against her whole tribe. To prove it, she pressed her forehead to his arm, her voice trembling. "Thank you." The human rested his hand gently on her head, his voice calm. "You don't need to thank me. You only need to believe." The firelight flickered between them, warm and alive. The girl's heart burned with it too, no longer cold, no longer empty. For the first time, she knew she was not unwanted. For the first time, she knew she was worth saving. The ruins were quiet again, the hunter's footsteps fading into the night. The fire crackled, its light soft against the broken stones. The human stood tall, but his breathing was heavy, his side bleeding from the wound he carried. The little, alien girl pressed her hands against his arm, her eyes full of worry. "You're hurt," she whispered again, her voice breaking with guilt. She felt it was her fault, all of it, the hunters, the fight, the blood. But the man shook his head, his eyes steady even through the pain. "This is not your fault," he said softly. "You did not choose to be left behind, you did not choose their cruelty." His words made her chest ache. Her people had always told her she was the problem, that her weakness had doomed them all. Yet this stranger spoke as if she was innocent, as if she deserved to live. He lowered himself onto a fallen stone, resting but never letting his guard fall. The girl crouched beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding with pieces of cloth. The firelight made her tears shine, but she refused to let them fall this time. She wanted to be strong, at least for him. Her heart screamed with the memory of what the hunters had said. She is nothing, she will always be nothing. The words echoed in her head, but now they clashed with his voice. She is worth more than all of you. The fire burned between those voices, and she felt caught between them. The tribe who had abandoned her, and the human who had chosen to fight for her. Her hands pressed harder against the cloth, her small body shaking with the choice before her. Would she continue to believe the lies of her people? Or would she believe in the stranger who had given her warmth, food, and protection? The night stretched long, the wind whistling through the ruins. The human's eyes never left the shadows, his hand always close to his weapon. Even wounded, he refused to let danger near her. The girl stared at him, her heart swelling with something she had never felt before. She realized it was not just safety he gave her, but a choice. A chance to decide who she really was. When the fire burned low, the hunters' voices returned in the distance. The girl froze, fear gripping her chest. The human rose to his feet, slow from pain but unyielding. He raised his blade again, standing between her and the sound, but before he could move further, her small hand caught his arm. She looked up at him, her eyes burning with something new. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. "This time, I stand too." The human looked down at her, surprise flickering across his face. Her body shook, her legs weak, but her voice did not falter. "All my life I stayed silent. I let them call me nothing. I believed them." Her breath caught, her tears shining. "But you showed me I am not nothing. You showed me I am worth more." Her hand tightened on his arm. "I will not hide anymore." The hunters' shapes appeared in the darkness once again, their cruel laughter filling the ruins. They had returned, with more numbers, their eyes burning with hate. The girl stepped forward, her knees weak but her voice sharp. "Stop!" she cried, her voice echoing louder than ever before. The hunters froze, startled by the sound. Never before had the worthless one spoken with such fire. Her tribe had always silenced her, ignored her. But tonight, her voice shook the air itself. The leader sneered, stepping closer. "Little fool, you dare speak now, you are still nothing." But the girl did not step back. Not this time. She raised her chin, her cloak slipping from her shoulders, her eyes blazing. "You left me to die. You called me a curse, but I lived," she shouted, "and I will not be silent again." The hunters growled, their weapons raised, but the girl's voice cut through their rage like the fire cutting through the dark. "I am not yours to curse. I am not yours to abandon." Her hand reached for, the humans gripping it tight, her small voice carried with strength she never knew she had. "I choose him. I choose his side." The human's chest swelled with pride, his eyes burning with fierce light. He lifted his blade again, this time not only to protect her but to fight beside her. The hunters hesitated, confusion spreading. For the first time, they saw the girl not as weak, not as silent, but as someone who had chosen her place, and her place was not with them, but with the stranger who stood unbroken by their cruelty. The fire roared higher as if the flames themselves answered her choice. The ruins shook with her words, her voice still ringing in the air. The human squeezed her hand once before stepping forward again. Together, they faced the tribe, their shadows long against the burning light. The girl's fear was still there, but it no longer chained her. She had chosen, and her choice was clear. She was no longer the abandoned one, no longer the silent one. She was no longer shivering in the dark, waiting for death. Now she stood in the firelight beside the man who had shown her worth. Her heart burned with courage, and her voice, once small and unwanted, had become a weapon stronger than the hunters' blades. The ruins burned with firelight, the hunters standing in the shadows, their eyes sharp but unsure. The little alien girl stood beside the human, her small hand gripping his arm, her voice still echoing in the night. For the first time, she had spoken not as the abandoned one, not as the unwanted child, but as someone who had chosen. She had chosen him, the stranger from the stars, and her choice carried weight stronger than fear. The leader of the hunters growled, his sharp teeth flashing. "You think a child's words change anything," he spat, his weapon raised. "She is still nothing, and you, human, are a fool for wasting your strength on her." But the human stepped forward, his eyes burning like fire, his voice low and dangerous. "She has more courage than all of you," he said. "She stood when you wanted her silent. She lived when you wanted her gone, and she chose to fight when you only know how to. Run from truth." The hunters shifted, their boots scraping against stone, their confidence cracking like glass. They were used to her silence, her weakness, but this girl standing tall before them was someone new. The firelight painted her face, no longer only thin and frightened, but alive with strength. The human lifted, his blade, his voice carrying like thunder. She is not nothing. She is mine to protect, mine to stand with. The girl's chest swelled with heat, her eyes shining with tears. No one had ever claimed her before, not as family, not as friend, not as anything. Yet this stranger had spoken words that broke every chain her people had wrapped around her. She squeezed his arm tighter, whispering, "I will not leave your side." The hunters growled again, but their steps faltered. One muttered in anger, another in doubt. The leader barked orders, but the fire in his voice was gone. They saw what she saw, the human bleeding but unbroken, the girl trembling but unafraid, and together they were stronger than the whole tribe. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of fire. Finally, the leader spat on the ground, his eyes dark with hate. "Keep your cursed one, human. She is no longer ours." His words were sharp, but his voice carried defeat. He turned, his men following with reluctant steps, their weapons lowered. The night swallowed their figures as they vanished into the dark. The girl sagged, her knees weak. But the human caught her before she could fall, his arm steady even through his wounds, his voice calm. "It's over," he whispered. Her tears came then, hot and heavy, falling against his chest. She had dreamed of being wanted, of being saved, but never had she believed it could be true. Now she was held by someone who had risked everything for her. The fire burned lower, its light soft and warm. The human sat against the wall, pulling her close beside him. She curled into his side, her small body trembling less now. The cloak wrapped around both of them, holding in the heat. She whispered through her tears, "Why me? Why save me?" He looked down at her, his hand resting gently on her head. "Because no one deserves to be left alone in the dark," he said. "Because you are more than what they called you, more than what they believed." His words sank into her like fire sinking into cold bones. She pressed closer, her voice a fragile whisper. "I belong with you." The human gave a small nod, his eyes closing for a moment as he let the fire's warmth wash over them. "You do," he said. The words wrapped around her heart tighter than the cloak, stronger than the flames. They were a promise, a bond, a truth she had never been given. The night passed slowly, but for once it did not feel endless. The girl slept against him, her dreams no longer filled with fear but with light. When dawn came, the ruins were painted gold, the shadows fading. Into nothing, she woke to find him still there, his arm around her, his presence steady. Her heart swelled with something she finally understood. She was not abandoned, not cursed, not worthless. The human rose with the morning sun, his wounds wrapped in cloth, his steps strong despite the pain. He looked down at her, his voice steady. "Will you walk with me?" Her small hand reached out, slipping into his, her grip tight and certain. "Yes," she said without hesitation. Her eyes turned toward the sky, where his ship waited, shining against the rising sun. She was no longer tied to the ruins of her past. She had a place now, not in the tribe that had cast her out, but beside the man who had chosen her. Together they stepped forward, their shadows long across the broken stones. The fire behind them died slowly, but the fire within her heart burned, stronger than ever. She had been abandoned, shivering and unwanted, but now she was saved, chosen and given a place to belong, not as nothing but as someone worthy, not alone, but beside a stranger from the stars who had become her protector, her family, her light.